I'd be a flapper girl. I would do that in a sec because I love to dance. I like to be with people. That's what I'd do.
And for me, it'd be the 60s. In the 60s, I had a great time playing sports, went to high school and graduated, met the love of my life. And what better time for me to go back there?
Easy. I would rather dance than I walk because if you see me in church, I'm always keeping the beat, and I keep the beat to everything.
Well, I would rather dance as well. I cannot sing and I cannot dance, but I think I can come closer to maybe doing something that's appropriate dancing than I can some other way.
No way, Jose.
Well, I'm Pastor Larry Enriquez, and this is Pastor Gary and his wife, Sue Obit. I've known him for many years. In fact, as I was thinking about it, it's been so many years. It's like there's a lot that we've done together and been a part of each other's lives. But one thing that I love celebrating is your marriage. And for those of you who may not be aware, Gary and Sue have been married 52 years. They'll be married 53 years this August. So I thought it'd be important to talk to them in what we're calling the love month, or February, because there's got to be some kind of love here that allows you to be together for 53 years. So that said, I have some questions for you, and you can there may be other things you want to talk about that aren't just my questions. But that said, every relationship has a beginning. Tell me a little bit about your beginning.
I'll go first then, if I may. And basically, Sue and I were in the same homeroom in junior high and doing divided things together. And we really knew of one another through middle school. And really, I think it was probably her junior year, our junior year of high school, because we graduated in the same class. We started going over to her house. She dated a good friend of mine. So we would go over to her house. And
Was he that good a friend, Gary?
Yeah, he was a pretty good friend.
Okay, well, you took his girlfriend. That's why I'm asking.
Oh.
You know.
He still talks to me, so I guess, although he won't invite me down to his home. But anyway, so we used to go over to Sue's house and hang out with her at the end of their dates.
Sure.
Just became kind of the thing to do, and drink Dr. Pepper. And that was where really it all started, and I thought she was pretty special.
Yeah. Now, Sue, do you remember the homeroom back in junior high? By the way, it's Vina Danks Junior High in Ontario, California, for anybody who's outside of this listening. So, do you remember that?
I do. Yeah, I do. And I think in as you have us thinking about it, sports is what brought us together.
Okay.
Because I have always enjoyed sports. If you put me out in the backyard with kids, I'm going to be playing with them.
Yeah.
But sports brought us together, and Gary's life has been surrounded by sports.
Sure.
So I would follow all of his sports activities, and I saw this guy out there who did pretty well.
Yeah, he was accomplished as a young man. I know that. Sure. Now, apart from all that, what's important for me, and I think for you too, that as we get a little bit older, that it's important that we give a message to those who are coming behind us to help them live as best a life as they can, especially before the Lord and as they live with each other. So it's important for us to talk about this in a way that could be helpful to other people. So I want to ask you this question. You can both talk to this, when did you first realize that this person was somehow more vital to you than just somebody that you knew, where it's like, I think can I say love?
Mm-hmm.
I think I love this person. Do you remember when that happened or how that happened?
You want to go first on that one?
Sure.
Okay.
It was at the University of Redlands.
Oh,
And-
so then years have passed
Uh-huh.
before you really come to this conclusion. Didn't happen right away. Wasn't love at first sight?
No.
Okay.
No, it was always friendship. And
Yeah.
I think friendship starts first. But we dated. I went off to Chaffey College, and Gary went to the University of Redlands. So I went 2 years to Chaffey College,
Mhm.
and then a year down at San Diego State. And when I transferred to the University of Redlands, I met this guy who was principled, principled above all of his roommates, above the rest of the people that I knew.
Sure.
And
Who was that guy?
I don't know. You grew into him.
Yeah,
Okay,
because so there was a little time where you were apart. In other words, you knew each other in junior high. You grew up in the same town, and so you probably were connected with each other even when you didn't know it. And then you went through high school, and then now there's another coming together.
Right. That's
Right.
exactly how it was.
Yeah.
Because we dated in high school, and for a period of time, even in college, when I was at Chaffey College, we
Right.
dated, but not as seriously as when we started it.
At least not for you. In your heart, you weren't going, this is all serious, but you liked it, right? Was he paying for your meals and stuff like that?
Are you kidding?
Oh my gosh, Gary. Well, Gary, when did she first become vital to you?
Truthfully, my senior year in high school, we started dating in high school, but my senior year, after the baseball season was over and school let out, we had all graduated, I was playing on the American Legion team. And so we went up to Yountville to play in the state tournament. And she came up with her friend to watch us play. And then we went back to the regional tournament in Roswell because we won the state. And we played there. We won the regional as well. But while we were back there, we won. And so therefore, we had a little bit of a period of time before we went to the finals, which were in South Dakota. And so while we were back there, the new movie that came out was Julie Andrews and what's the name of that thing? Where she's the I'm trying to think of it.
Mary Poppins?
No, not Mary Poppins. What's the other one?
The Hills Are Alive with the sound of music.
Music. There you go. Sound of Music. They showed it back there, and I went and watched the movie, and it reminded me of her. And so anyway, we came back, and then I ended up going to Redlands as soon as I got home, and Sue was at Chaffey. So
would it be fair to say this, Gary? I do, but that at some point in your life, maybe a long point or a long stretch in your life, sports was the most important thing in your life.
It truly,
probably more important than a relationship with a group.
It was.
Yeah. And then at some point, that began to kind of change. I think. Would you say that?
As I grew, sports were. But when I got to Redlands, and I realized, I need companions, someone, that I could spend time with and be with. And Sue was at Chaffey College, so I'd come home on the weekends. That's not that far away, but not all the weekends, but some of them. And so she did come over and watch me play some games because I was on football team. And so, but actually, when you talk about the emphasis on my career, is when I decided that I wanted to go into teaching. It was not so much I wanted to go into teaching as much as I wanted to go into coaching because I wanted to be close to the sports that I played and I loved, and that was really what my life was about. But then I enjoyed history as well. So.
Yeah, but something happened, and you began to come to this place where, but we do it in at least I do in premarital counseling. I'll ask somebody, and if you were going to get married, and I was going to marry you, I'd say, why do you want to get married? And if I were to ask you back then, I don't know if you had a counselor or not, but they would ask you, why do you want to get married? What would you have said?
I would have basically said that when Sue had gone to San Diego State, God ordained this, I'm sure. She could not get the classes she needed. And so she was just spinning her wheels. She went there for a semester, and I encouraged her, come to Redlands. You can get all the classes you need. You can go into, she ended up majoring in sociology, but you can get what you need. And I think that was it at that time. Then she came to Chaffey, to Redlands, and then we spent the last 2 years there, and I think our relationship grew completely.
But the question was this. If you're going to marry her, I would say, why do you want to marry her? That's the question. Why would you want to marry her? Because she went to Redlands? No. Why?
Because she followed me over there.
Because she was willing to do what you commanded.
I was attracted to her. I loved her.
You loved her.
I loved her.
You're looking for that.
Yes, I know. This is the month of love.
That's right.
And I think
at some point, would you have said, I love him. Yeah.
I think at Redlands, at the time, it was a Christian school.
Sure.
It was a Christian university. And by going to convocation once a week, that bond.
What is convocation?
Well, we had a religious service once a week, and then we had an enrichment.
See, they used to have that at colleges.
And that bond, when I would walk into convocation, you're looking for him because I wanted to sit next to him. I didn't want him sitting with his friends. But it just, I realized that God put him in my life.
Now, let me say this though. You looking back, you can say that, correct? But I'm not too sure that you were saying that. Oh, God's brought this guy in my life, or were you thinking that? Were you thinking, oh, God's brought this guy in my life now? Were you thinking that back then? I know our memories get weird. I understand that, but as best as you can recall, was God a big part of you saying, "This guy's for me"?
I think so. I really do.
Okay.
And let me explain why. Growing up, I attended the church across the street, and that church didn't ask anything of me, and I didn't have to do anything. But when you come to Redlands and you hear the gospel once a week,
right,
and it's powerful,
sure,
to you, so that when I would come into convocation, I would look for him because I wanted to sit next to him. I wanted to hold his hand.
Right.
I just, and you're right. I think it's me realizing it today that was God telling me that this was
a good choice. Right. Okay. How about you, Gary? That in light of that same thing, when you said I'm marrying her because I love her. At what point did you start going? I'm gonna. By the way, do you remember the first time you said "I love you"? Sue?
No, I don't.
I don't either.
You don't?
I don't. But I'm sure it was while we were at Redlands during.
Sure.
Maybe even earlier. I really was smitten with her.
Sure.
Really for all throughout college, to be truthful. And maybe didn't love her at the beginning, but it grew into love.
Sure.
And I just wanted to be with her. I was glad she eventually came to Redlands and spent her last 2 years there. 3 actually, because we went our 5th year there as well. But we got married right after college, and then we went back and got our teaching privilege.
Well, in reflection of my own life, that's why I'm asking you this, is that I remember the first time, well, not the day and the hour, all that, but when I was going to say, I love you to her, how scary that was.
Mm-hmm.
It just was, I was scared to death to say it, even though I felt it. Now, I didn't quite understand love. I'm barely getting to understand it now, but the idea of love and saying that to somebody, I'd never said it to anybody. I dated a number of girls and went out with girls, but this is the first girl I was going to say, I love you. How scared I was to say that. You don't have any of that kind of thing in your relationship? I'm just curious because there's something about when you love somebody that is scary.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, I was not confident that she was going to return that love, certainly. But we had spent, when we were at Redlands and she was there, spent all kinds of time together. We didn't date anyone else. I wasn't afraid really to say, I love you.
So at some point it wasn't as risky.
No,
in other words, you realized, it was more risky for me because I was leaving high school. She was going to stay there with all these bums.
That's right.
So I thought there's still a risk here that she'll love somebody else, I suppose, maybe.
I think the scarier thing for me is I knew I loved him.
Yeah.
I mean, that just, and I can't identify when we said it or when I knew exactly, but the idea of marriage was a little bit frightening to me because that's a bond, that's a binding commitment to that person. And we don't, we've never even had an issue. We've had issues in our marriage.
Sure.
but not to where we want to separate or go separate ways or take time out or anything like that. But when you consider marriage, it's a commitment.
Sure. So at some point, I think for Gary and Sue, for me, and I think for you too, is that at some point we choose to love somebody.
Right.
There's a choice we make to love.
Truthfully, for me, Larry, I really never dated much. Really, Sue was about all I dated. I had a girlfriend in junior high that wasn't Sue.
Did you give her Christopher?
but that's basically it. And so for me, it became very obvious that this is the one I had devoted myself to and I loved and wanted to marry. And so I actually proposed to her in our senior year of college. And we had we went to the Magic Lamp for our marriage
Announcement.
engagement.
Yeah. And that restaurant is still
it's
still alive.
Made it through.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, I'm going to go to another step here.
Okay.
1 year of marriage can be hellish for anybody at any given time in a marital life. Any given year can be tough. Now, you've had 53 years almost of marriage, so I'm sure you've had some of those years. So thinking of that, and I know you alluded to it a little bit, Sue, is like, we never really had the inclining to separate, but in some ways you were kind of separated.
Yep.
Because of where you worked and all that. Now, I know all that story. You don't, and we don't need to tell that story per se, but she was working at some distance away and was sometimes staying a number of days there, and I'm sure that put a stress on your marriage too. But looking back, what would you say was the toughest thing about being married to each other? Was there ever an incident or a thing or something that goes like this? Yeah, that is reflective of a very tough time in our lives. Do you have any recollection of that?
I do. And I'm sure Sue does. We feel the same way.
Yeah.
1980.
1980.
Oh, they both have this.
She did the PGA back in Rochester. PGA Championship, won by Jack Nicklaus, if that matters. Back in Rochester, New York. So she was gone 11 months. And I was teaching. So, and it's just like, anyway, it was a tough time.
Sure.
She was gone. And, I got married to meet with my wife. I didn't get married to.
Sure. Bye-bye.
And and not only then, but she went to how many Masters golf tournaments? 30 Masters golf tournaments. So she was in Augusta, Georgia, with me. She went to Akron, Ohio, and ran golf tournaments. She went to Indianapolis 500, 30 plus times, etc. She was always gone, and I went twice to Indy. Other than that, so she was gone. So I had to adapt to it, but she was worth it.
By the way, did you both agree on that, or did you just do it?
It was just part of the career. We didn't have a child at the time. This was before I met.
So it was a mutual. You agreed that you were going to do that.
Yeah, I reluctantly agreed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would not have chosen it, but I was okay. I mean, I was okay with it.
Sure. That's important, about how we make decisions in marriage, which is a whole other segment. I think we won't talk about here per se.
But I had some jealousies and things like that.
Well, maybe rightfully so. You're apart. In fact, the Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians, it tells us that when you get married, that your body's not your own.
Right.
It says the wife belongs to the husband belongs to the wife. So you have this mutual relationship.
Sure.
And it's talking in context there to sex.
Yeah.
It says that in light of that, don't forsake each other's commitment to bring each other joy and the life that sex brings that's unique to the marriage union. So when you're separated for a number of weeks, and when we're young, it could just be even days, and we're going like, where are you, honey? Yeah. So like when you're separated for months, that puts a kind of a risk, because there's temptations for all of us in that regard. I think for both of you, I'm assuming that there was temptations and there was struggles in light of that. Wanting to be connected, wanting to have a relationship, wanting to be intimate, and not being able to do so can be very frustrating. Would you say that was the case?
Absolutely. That was tough times.
Yeah.
And the difficulty, too, was I would be gone for 2 weeks and come home for 4 days, and then go back and forth for the 11 months.
Right.
But when I would come home, I wanted to nest. I'm a nester. Things have their place, and I learned that Gary was also developing his own things that he wanted to do, that he prioritized things.
His own routines, his own habits, his own life.
And then I came home and I wanted to just immediately go back. But it doesn't. It takes time.
Sure. So how did you resolve those, I would say probably many conflicts that arise from being separated in light of your work? So it's not the separation that comes from people being at odds, but that you chose to be separated brought a number of issues and struggles in your marriage, I'm assuming. Without going into all of that, let me just ask you if there's any way to answer it. How do you resolve that in marriage? What advice would you give to somebody in resolving conflict that can become deep conflict when we don't resolve it in a timely fashion?
Communication. You have to sit face to face. Well, cry face to face and talk it out.
Yeah.
Saying
Argue it out if necessary.
well,
Yeah.
But you have, if you clam up and hold it in, it's gonna fester.
Sure.
And so we had some really tough conversations.
Sure.
But to me, the one thing that really helped to solidify our marriage, strengthen it, I think, was our child. Because we had been married 18 years before Amanda was born. And for those who may not know, Amanda is adopted. We were unable, and that's one of the things we struggled with as well.
Sure.
Was fertility. And so, but anyway, when she was adopted, we brought her home. That really, sometimes children do not help the marriage. In fact, they can be a hindrance. But for us, it was a special thing.
It was a
really
cementing bond that kind of furthered the bond.
Yeah, because we adopted her. We with her.
Now, I'm going to make a kind of a psych comment, and you can respond to that. But we say you need to communicate. That's a good issue in marriage, communicate. I would say this, that we're always communicating. The issue isn't communicate. I think everybody communicates. To me, the issue is pay attention to what your spouse is communicating. Because even the silence, the climbing up, all those things are communicating something. We ignore it, we don't deal with it, but we're always communicating. So it's really important that we, as married couples, put on ears that pay attention to our spouse, because they're always communicating in their silence, in their isolation, in their climbing up, etc. So how do we best help one another communicate so that we deal through it? You said a good word, so it doesn't fester. If we don't deal with it, it festers and it becomes, what could be anger becomes bitter. What becomes guilt becomes shame. And those things become more, like I always look at shame and bitterness as being, anger and guilt in cement.
Right.
It's become another thing that we have to deal with. Now we're using chisels to get out of it rather than, some other kind of easier solvent in a relationship. So in your marriage, you've obviously have resolved it enough to stay married,
right,
and to continue to love each other. But it hasn't always been easy. It's been difficult, and you've had to work through that, because ultimately love was a choice you made.
Right.
And at some level, you chose to stay there, even though there was temptations to, I'm assuming temptations that we all have, to choose otherwise, but you didn't.
Absolutely true. And I think the things that get us through it now and got us through it before was, you got to hug one another, show you love them. We've got to pray together and do devotionals, read the Bible, and those things bring you together, because God's word just makes a big difference.
Amen, it does. Well, kind of closing up here, looking back as best you can, let's look at a couple things. One, If you could say, I would do this different, what would you do different? As a person in the marriage. Not as a couple that decided we'd do this, but as a person in the marriage, what would you have done different?
That's a tough one. You got an idea?
I do.
Oh, go ahead then. I'm
I
struggling.
would not junk up my life.
Hallelujah. Me too. I agree with that.
Because our lives, even in retirement,
Sure.
what I find that in retirement we're busier now than we've ever been, and it's because of a lot of the commitments that we've made, and the commitments take responsibility. And with responsibility comes time, and so I would probably still have my core things that I really want to dedicate my time to, but I would lessen my load.
And I would agree with that. I have spent far too much time doing things in the community when I would rather be at home relaxing. We love just to sit in bed and have a cup of coffee and watch something on TV in the mornings when we can, but there aren't very many mornings we get to do it. And, and just spend more time. We miss out on a lot of times when friends are getting together for dinner or whatever, and we miss that because we're jumped up.
Yeah. And I would say this, that you're courageous to admit that and say that, because it's still not too late to change.
Right.
You can change that, but you have to be intentional about it, right? But I am giving you freedom to change.
Thank you, Larry.
I certainly am aware of your lives and how busy and how faithful you are. The kind of things that that all of us who run organizations have long to have people like you on our board or leading our boards, because we know things will happen because you're faithful, you're committed, you're doing what you do wholeheartedly. So consequently, you're going to be dragged around by everybody who wants to abuse you and use you in that regard.
Well, I always tell myself, if it's worth doing, do it right.
Right, correct. So I would say what's worth doing to do right is really focus on this and how you can even better give this away. How do you give the principles of love and commitment and struggle and recovery? Even that, somebody's calling you now. Gary and Sue,
Sorry.
I need you. Come now.
Yes, Jesus, we'll be right there.
You know what? Your phone is always ringing. That phone and the other phone and other phones are calling and saying,
Sorry.
It's okay. It's real. This is a genuine conversation, and it came at the right time of saying, there's always somebody bidding for your time and for your energy.
Who is it?
Gary Simpson.
Oh.
There we go. So, winding it down, thank you for your time, for your energy, for your commitment to each other, for your commitment to Jesus, and to this body here that you've invested your life and time in, our friendship and your leadership here. And I'm going to pray that you continue to find a way to give this away. Community stuff, you've done your time there. They'll do okay without you. Not as good.
They will.
But they'll find a way. But I'm in this boat too. How do I better give away the things that will help other people's lives? Be not just committed to each other when times are tough, but how do we help each other live a more focused life, focused on Christ and what He's calling us to do, and the strength He'll give us to be, in love, and that we're in every day committing ourselves to each other. Every day we are choosing to love. Every day we're choosing to stay in marriage. Every day we're choosing to say no to the world that says, make a change, do something else, whatever. But I appreciate your lives and what you've given, certainly to me and so many others, as a reflection of people who are committed to each other. Not because life is perfect or that you're perfect, but that you're committed to something greater than even yourself. And that is to somebody else. That's what real love is, I think. Anyway, get to know Gary and Sue Obit if you haven't, but don't ask them to be on your board.
That's right. But you can take us out for lunch with Larry.
I'm in. Love you guys.
We
Thanks
love
for
you
this
too.
time.